I was 59 the winter it happened, retired postal worker, widowed, the kind of man who knows every sound his house makes. I live about a mile outside of Silver Ridge, northern Montana, near the tree line, not far from where I grew up. When my wife passed, I came back for the quiet. The house is old, older than me. Single-story stone chimney, wooden floors that carry the cold straight through your socks, the kind of place where silence hums in the corners. I always liked that, until last January. That night, the wind had teeth. You could hear it scraping along the eaves like it wanted in. I'd finished dinner, washed up, and was sitting near the stove reading an old newspaper. The power had flickered twice, so I'd set the lantern beside me just in case. Around 11:30, I heard it. A sound too soft to belong to the storm. A single hollow knock. Not on the door, lower, from beneath the floorboards. I remember looking up, expecting it to come again. It didn't. Not right away. Just one dull hit, like someone had tapped a broom handle from below. I told myself it was the wood settling in the cold. That's what it sounded like. Almost. But 10 minutes later, another knock came. Exactly the same rhythm. 3 slow beats. Then silence. You know that kind of silence that feels heavier than sound? That's what filled the room. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the pipes, maybe the frost shifting under the house. Still, I got up and checked the basement door. Bolted. Same as always. When I lay down to sleep, I could still hear the faint ticking of the stove cooling. Then, just as my eyes started to close, another knock. Louder this time. From right under my bed, I froze. Didn't move a muscle, didn't breathe. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm, like someone trying not to be noticed but still wanting to be heard. 3 knocks, a pause. Then one more, softer, almost polite. My first thought was animal. Maybe something had burrowed in. But I'd been living here 5 years, and nothing bigger than a field mouse had ever made it inside. This sounded deliberate. I reached for the flashlight on my nightstand and turned it on. The beam shook in my hand as I aimed it at the floor. The boards looked normal. Still, I could feel it, a vibration under the wood, faint, like breath. That's when I noticed something new. The air smelled different, like damp wool and soil, the way basements do after rain. Except the basement had been dry for weeks. I swung my legs off the bed and listened. The air beneath the floor seemed to move, slow and steady, as if the house itself was breathing. I didn't go down there that night. Didn't even get out of bed again. I sat awake until dawn, waiting for the first hint of light through the curtains. Only then did I get the courage to open the basement door. The steps creaked like always. My flashlight beam wobbled over the shelves, the old workbench, the furnace, all normal. But near the far wall, where the foundation dipped slightly, I saw something I'd never noticed before. A square outline in the dirt, maybe 3 feet wide. Wood planks nailed into the ground, old, older than the rest of the floor. I knelt down. The wood was rough and pale beneath the dust. The nails rusted deep. As I brushed away the soil, I saw a small ring of iron at the edge, a handle, a hatch, and the faintest impression of a handprint beside it, not pressed into the dust, pressed into the wood. I stayed crouched there for what felt like an hour, not because I wanted to open it, but because I knew I couldn't not. It's a strange thing. Curiosity when mixed with fear. It pushes against you from the inside, slow and heavy, until you move. I wrapped my fingers around the handle and pulled. It didn't budge. But as soon as I let go and from below came 3 slow knocks, right against the wood. I dropped the flashlight. It rolled, clattering against the stone foundation. The light spun wildly, painting the walls in jerky circles, and for just a second, I saw movement through the gaps between the boards. Not a shape, not a person, just a shadow shifting like something drawing breath. I stumbled backward up the stairs, slammed the door, and locked it. The sound stopped instantly. Not fading, just gone, like it had been waiting for that. The next morning, I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it, that the wind had played tricks. But there were marks on the inside of the basement door, long, uneven scratches, fresh in the wood. I haven't opened it since. And at night, when the house grows still, I still hear it sometimes. 3 knocks, always from the same spot. I used to think it was the house settling. Now I'm not so sure the house is what's doing the settling. Have you ever lived completely alone, so alone that every small sound feels personal? If you have, tell me what sound your house makes when it breathes, because sometimes that's the only way it tells you. It isn't empty. I am 38. I live alone on a small cul-de-sac where snow turns the street into a tunnel of hush. People here keep to themselves. We nod by our mailboxes. We park precisely. We shovel right to the curb. The house is old but steady. 2 stories. A narrow front hall with a runner that never lies flat. Stairs that voice their age when I climb at night. A furnace that hums like a far road. I trust these sounds. After a year alone, I know them the way a person knows their own steps. The storm started near sundown. The forecast had said light flurries. That was generous. By 10, the wind had pulled the whole neighborhood into a snow globe. Streetlights blurred. Driveways disappeared. The world shrank to my living room. Lamp glow, blanket, steam from a chipped mug. I was halfway through an old mystery film when the power flickered. The room dropped into a deeper dark for a heartbeat, then came back. I checked the thermostat. I topped off the kettle, a simple ritual. It makes the long nights feel tidy. At 11:07, the doorbell rang. I paused the film. I did not get up right away. It might have been a plow crew. It might have been a neighbor in trouble. But it was late. I live on a quiet block. We do not visit unannounced, not in a storm. The bell rang again, longer this time. The sound floated through the hall and spread across the floor like cold water. I set my mug down. My hands had gone damp, and I did not know when that had started. I walked to the entryway and stood behind the door for a second to listen. Nothing. Only the soft hiss of wind catching the porch rail. I slid the chain across. I set my palm against the wood. I leaned to the peephole. A man stood on my porch, hood up, coat dark with snow, hands tucked in his pockets. He did not move. He did not rock with the cold. He was as still as the porch post. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. "Hello?" He lifted his head. I saw a pale face and eyes that did not land on mine through the lens. They seemed to look past me or through me, the way people look at smoke to see where it starts. "Good evening," he said. The tone was calm, careful, each word placed. "I am looking for someone." "Which house?" I asked. "You may have the wrong street." "This one," he said. He did not hesitate. "I need to ask about the woman with the red SUV. She came here, I know she did. No one on my block owned that kind of car. I was sure. We all park outside. I see the same row of shapes every night." "You have the wrong place," I said. "There is no red SUV here." He took that in without a nod. Snow collected on his shoulders in a quiet pile. The wind pressed the hood against his cheek. His hands stayed buried. "Can you open the door?" he asked. "Just a little." "It is important." I kept my face close to the peephole and did not blink. "We can talk like this." There was a small pause. He seemed to listen. Not to me, to the house. Then he did something simple that made the air in the hall feel tight. He raised his right hand and tapped the wood near the lock. 3 slow knocks, then a single softer one, almost like a period. I had heard that pattern once before. Not on this door, on the floor of my old apartment from the unit below. A neighbor who worked nights had used that rhythm when she wanted me to turn down the TV. 3 slow taps. A breath. One more to be sure. It is a polite pattern. It is also a way to let someone know you can wait. I stepped back and felt the runner fold under my heel. The man let his hand drop to his side. He tilted his face a fraction closer to the door, not enough to press, just enough to feel near. "Please," he said, "a minute. That is all." My breath clouded the peephole. I wiped the lens with the edge of my sleeve. I kept my voice even. "You should try the next block, maybe the cross street. No one like that lives here." He looked past the glass again, as if reading the edges of my hallway. He had that blank calm you see in waiting rooms, a quiet that does not belong to the space it is in. "Okay," he said, and took one step back. I watched him turn toward the rail. The wind pushed a drift across his boots. He set his hand on the post. He looked out at the dark street. It should have felt like he had given up. It did not. It felt like a pause between 2 lines of a sentence. I waited. A full minute. 2. Then I went to the side window that faces the yard and parted the curtain with 2 fingers. The porch was empty. The steps were clean white with a dark path where someone had stood. I moved to the front window next. He was not on the walk. He was not on the street. The snow showed no prints beyond my porch. The wind had filled the surface level clean in seconds, but the top layer still tells you if a body is nearby. The whole street looked unmarked, blank, as if the bell had never rung. I turned off every light on the first floor. Not a dramatic choice, a careful one. I wanted to see past the glass without my own reflection staring back. I stood in the dark and listened to the house settle. The film on the TV glowed in paused silence. The kettle clicked as it cooled. The furnace hummed. All familiar. Then, from the rear of the house, another sound found me. 3 slow knocks. Then 1. The back door sits under the covered stoop. It does not face the street. It faces the small square of yard where I keep a grill and a bench that looks better than it feels. No one can reach that door without passing my kitchen window. No one had. The knocks came again, same rhythm. The sound felt closer to the table than the stoop, as if the wood had learned the pattern and was speaking it back. I told myself it was the vent, or the pipes, or the way the wind sometimes makes a house speak around its seams. I walked to the kitchen. I did not turn on the light. I stood by the sink and waited for my eyes to adjust. The yard lay still. The fence puckered white at the top. The grill was a short mound with a round cap. Everything held its shape the way snow makes things hold still. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Then one more. Lighter. It came from the door, not the wood this time. The glass. I could see the faintest quiver in the pane. I leaned closer and cupped my hands around my face to kill the reflection. I tried to see a shape on the other side. Nothing. No hood. No shoulders. Only the suggestion of a figure at the edge of the stoop, a shadow that did not belong to the railing. "Sir," I said. My voice dipped. "You need to leave." I waited for footsteps. There were none. The shape did not move. The glass did not fog. The pane did not show the pale bloom of breath. I backed away and went upstairs. My legs felt heavy, as if the steps were learning to hold me slower. In the bedroom, I pushed the nightstand against the door. I do not think small furniture can stop anything real, but it gives your hands something to do when your head wants a map. From the window above the street, I could see the whole block. Every porch was an island of soft light. Every drive was a sheet. A single set of tail lights crawled far off and turned out of sight. No walkers, no visitors. I called the non-emergency line. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. I kept my voice quiet and steady. I said there had been a stranger at my door. I said he had tried the bell twice and then moved to the back without crossing the yard. I said I was alone. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and wait for the patrol. She asked if the stranger had made threats. He had not. She asked if he had tried the handle. He had not. She said the roads were bad, but someone would swing by. I thanked her and stayed at the window. It is strange what the body does with waiting. My shoulders locked. My jaw ached without me noticing when it started. I held the phone like a hot mug long after I hung up. Downstairs, the knocks returned. Soft this time. Not at the door, somewhere within the frame of the house, as if the pattern had moved into the grain. Tap, tap, tap. A pause, then one. You would expect a loud sound to be worse. It is not. The small ones decide the air you breathe. They ask for your attention and then reward you with nothing, and there is a price for that. I focused on other things. The faint tick from the hallway clock, the far rumble of a plow on the main road, the kettle metal cooling with tiny clicks. I listed these out loud like items on a shelf. It helped. Red and blue washed the snow at 11:31. A cruiser rolled past slow, tires whispering. The patrol did not stop. They circled the block and came back around. The officer leaned toward the glass, scanning porches. I stepped away so I would not flash a silhouette in the window and give myself a small scare for no reason. By the time I went back to the peephole, the porch was empty again. The wind painted fresh powder over the marks the man had left. It erased him so quickly that it felt like the weather knew how to help. The cruiser idled in front for a minute. The officer shone a narrow beam along the fence in the side yard. The beam paused on my back gate. It looked closed from here. It always sags a little left. The light touched the latch and moved on. I would have slept by dawn if the night had let me, but one last thing kept the hour open. At 12:04, the furnace clicked off, and the house settled into that deep, clean quiet you only hear after a snow. The whole block felt held. In that pause, from the thin space between the floor and my bedroom door, a sound drifted up. 3 slow knocks, then one, and a second later, as soft as a person deciding on a word, I heard the chain on the front door shift. Not a rattle, not force, the lightest tap of metal finding its own weight. I held my breath and listened for footsteps. None came. Only the quiet of a street that had buried its own tracks. I do not know when I finally slept. I know I checked the chain in the morning and saw a small thing that did not make sense. The clasp had a speck of paint missing where the metal meets the slide. Bare steel. Fresh. A thin curl of paint sat on the mat below, pale as nail parings. The snow in the yard held no prints. That afternoon the sky cleared and the world turned bright. I shoveled my walk and saw 2 square patches near the porch posts where the snow looked slightly lower. The exact size of feet that had stood very still for a very long time. That night I set a chair under the knob like I was back in a dorm. I know a chair is not a lock. It is a reminder. It says, you know what you heard. And when the house went quiet enough to hear its own weight, the pattern came again, far away. Not at the door, not under the floor. Somewhere within the walls, like a memory finding its way home. Tap, tap, tap. A pause, then one. I fixed my eyes on the hallway and waited to see if the chain would lift. It did not lift. It breathed. The metal rose the smallest fraction, as if something on the other side had taken in air. Water keeps its own kind of night. When it goes still, you hear what the shore has been holding. I was 31 when I borrowed my cousin's lake place for a week. She called it a cabin, but it was really a small house tucked among birch and pine, 20 minutes off the highway, a long gravel road away from the nearest late-night light. The kind of spot you promise yourself you'll finally read the books you've carried through 3 moves. I arrived with a bag of groceries, 2 paperbacks, and the gentle relief that comes when you close your trunk and hear nothing but birds and your own breath. The house smelled like cedar and dry stone. A short veranda faced the water. The boards on the steps were soft from years of weather and bare feet. My cousin left a note on the counter. Keys on the hook. Pump handle squeaks. The heater ticks before it warms. The lake will sound closer than it is at night. You're fine. Under it, she drew a small square with 4 dots in the corners. I didn't know why, but the shape looked reassuring, like a window. The first day passed the way first days should. I stacked the fridge. I learned the light switches. I read on the veranda until the words drifted and my attention turned to the surface of the lake. It held the sky like a sheet of dark glass. A loon called once near dusk, the kind of sound that feels older than the shore itself. I went inside when the mosquitoes started to find me. By midnight, the woods fell into a hush so complete it felt tender. The stove ticked softly. A log settled. The house took a breath and became part of the dark around it. Then I heard footsteps, not on the stairs, not on the path. Directly in front of the veranda window, as if someone was walking across the water. The sound was a faint crush and lift, like wet boards welcoming a slow boot. 4, maybe 5 steps. Then stillness. The lake remained smooth, black, unbroken. No ripples, no rings spreading out from the shore. I told myself it was ice memory. That late spring trick where the lake keeps old sounds a while, even though it was high summer and the night air was soft. I turned a page I did not read and waited for another sound. None came. Sleep found me near 2. The second night, the footsteps came sooner. They started at 12:03. I know because I had just checked my phone to make sure I wasn't drifting into the kind of nap that ruins morning. 4 steps. A pause. Another, closer to the window this time, where the veranda boards meet the frame. I stood very still in the dim. Lamp off. Moon low. Something about the rhythm told me it belonged to a person who wasn't in a hurry, but who also wasn't lost. Deliberate, as if the night itself had decided to cross the yard. I walked to the glass and cupped my hands around my face to kill the reflection. Nothing stood there. The moon drew a pale path on the water. The far shore was a darker line against the sky. I could see the 2 posts at the edge of the veranda, where my cousin hangs string lights in fall. Each wore a cap of moths. No figure, no wake. I locked the door anyway. I checked the back latch. I told the quiet that I'd heard it and I was going to bed. Sometimes saying the obvious aloud is all you can do. It should have ended there, but houses near water have long memories. Around 1, a lighter sound answered from beneath my bedroom floor. Not heavy, not a full step. 3 soft knocks. A pause. Then 1 more, almost shy. I held my breath. The cabin held its own. I did not sleep deeply. On the 3rd day, I found prints by the veranda steps. Not boot prints, not bare feet. 2 shallow ovals in the moss where the ground dips before the boards, as if someone had stood there a while, placing their weight in a neat shape a little longer than a palm. The impression faced the window. I told myself it could have been a raccoon or the porch chair dragged and set back, but the chair's legs were round and these ovals were long. The moss held the shape with a kind of careful pride. That evening, I drew the curtains early and turned the radio low, more for company than music. The station out of town fades after dinner and carries the static of weather talks from places you've never been. The dial slipped as I washed dishes, and I let it detune to a soft, breathy rush that sits well in an empty room. The footsteps came at 12:02. I do not know if the minute mattered, only that it was almost the same. 4 steps, heavier by a hair. Then the small knock pattern answered from under the floor, right beneath the table. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Then 1. I clicked off the radio and listened to the hush that followed the static. The hush felt thick, The lake outside held its black mirror. The posts kept their moth crowns. I thought of calling someone in town and couldn't think of anyone who would come because of a sound on a lake. It is strange how long a person can stand in a doorway at night. I stood there until my feet tingled. I moved only when I needed more air than the hall could hold. Upstairs, I cracked the small window facing the water and let the cool slide over my hands. The footsteps did not come again that night. Morning brought simple tasks: sweep the veranda, rinse a mug, stretch the creek from the upstairs step with a little weight to ease it. I found a small curl of paint near the front door, pale as paper skin, and a tiny bare arc on the metal where the chain rests when it is still. I told myself the door sways. The wind finds what it can and takes what it wants. I pocketed the paint. The fourth night, clouds erased the moon. The lake went from black to pitch. I lit one candle near the chair and set it inside a small glass so the flame would not dance too high. The house looked like a quiet picture in a frame. I sat and let my eyes settle. The footsteps began from farther out than before. Not on the veranda, not at the waterline. The first 3 presses sounded like they came from the lake itself, moving toward me with the patience of someone who will arrive when they mean to. Then the boards of the veranda answered with a low breath, the way wood sighs when it accepts weight in the cool. I listened for slosh, for water shaken off, for anything wet. The air smelled like pine and a clean, faint chill. Nothing else. "Hello," I said, and the candle tightened its flame as if the word drew the room in. The knocks replied from the floor by my heel. 3, then 1. The sound was not loud. The sound knew the shape of the house. I went to the bedroom and took out the small travel mirror from my bag. Old habit. I have used it to see around corners since college. When a friend taught me the trick during a semester, we both pretended we were braver than we were. I set the mirror on the floor, angled to the window and the bottom of the veranda door. From the glass, I could see the slice of night beneath the door, wide enough for a line of light by day. Now, a thin thread of darker dark. The thread changed briefly, as if a shadow leaned near without touching. Then it stilled. I waited. The house waited with me. Past midnight, the wind freshened and found the birch leaves. They answered in a hush that felt like a hand across fabric. Something about that sound made me think of the square my cousin had drawn on her note, the one with 4 dots at the corners, a window that did not look out but in. I opened the bedside table, took the note, and placed it on the floor where the knocks had come. I do not know why I thought to do it. I only know that when I pressed the paper flat and stepped back, the knocks came again, and this time they were gentle enough that I felt them more than heard them. Tap, tap, tap. A pause, then 1. Right on the square. I whispered that I understood. I did not. But the room liked the idea that I might. At 12:41, a light moved across the far shore. A single window blinked awake among the pines and held there, a quiet rectangle, too distant to see the outlines of a person inside. The reflection trembled in the lake. With the light came a new sound, thin and regular, like a radio 2 rooms away tuned between stations. It carried the same pattern as the knocking, except stretched, as if the rhythm had found words of its own and was trying them on. I put on a coat over my pajamas and went to the back door. I opened it to the screen and let the night air touch my face. The light across the water glowed steady. The veranda boards smelled faintly of old rain. I could have called out. I did not. Something about the quiet felt agreed upon, the kind of silence that shakes hands with you and expects you to keep it. When the light on the far shore finally went out, the radio hiss faded with it. The posts at my rail kept their small crowns. The lake resumed its soft breath. The house relaxed around me like a friend letting a secret sit. I slept near dawn and woke with an idea I could not explain. I took chalk from the junk drawer. the stub of a pale blue stick my cousin uses for marking boards when she repairs things, and drew a neat square on the floor under the window. 4 dots at the corners. Then I drew the same square, small and careful, on the top step of the veranda beside the door. That evening, the footsteps started from closer than any night before, not from the water or the boards, from just beyond the door, as if a presence had already arrived and was waiting politely for me to notice. I stood at the window, with the candle low and the room quiet. "Come back tomorrow," I said. "I'll be here." The house seemed to like the promise. A little draft moved. The flame bowed. I turned to put out the candle and heard a final sound for the night. The gentle lift of the chain against the door. Not a rattle, just the metal catching a breath. Then, under my feet, soft as a thought I didn't finish, the pattern answered one last time. Tap, tap, tap. A pause, then one. When I woke at first light, a small, wet shape marked the veranda step beside the chalk square. Not a footprint, not a paw. A perfect oval, as if something had rested its palm and waited. "Before we begin, tell me, are you listening in the dark tonight, or with the lights still on? And if a knock came from inside your walls right now, would you answer, or stay perfectly still?" I was 26 when I moved into the building on Maple and 3rd. It wasn't much. 6 floors, cracked brick, the kind of place where the hallways always smell faintly of rain and old coffee. But rent was cheap, and after a bad breakup, cheap felt like healing. My apartment, 6B, sat near the end of the top floor hallway, the kind of end where footsteps echo and die before they reach the last door. A single window overlooked the alley. The radiator hissed every few minutes, as if reminding you it was alive. For the first few weeks, the silence was comforting. No neighbors on either side. One unit vacant, the other occupied by an older woman who left notes on the bulletin board about missing laundry coins. At night, I could hear the city hum faintly through the bricks, a soft lullaby of traffic and wind. I slept easy, until one Thursday in November. It started with the pipes. They knocked. You expect that in old buildings, the rattle of metal, the clank of heat finding its way. But this wasn't that. It wasn't random. 3 sharp knocks, a pause, then one. I remember standing in the kitchen, frozen with a fork halfway to my mouth. The sound came again from inside the wall behind the sink. Tap, 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 pause, tap. I laughed a little to myself, said out loud, "Guess the pipes want dinner too." But as soon as I spoke, the knocks stopped, and didn't come again that night. The next morning I mentioned it to Mrs. Green, the woman from 6C. She frowned, the kind of frown that starts behind the eyes. "Room 6B?" she asked. "You're in that one?" I said yes, unsure what that meant. She looked toward the end of the hall, lowered her voice. "They just finished fixing the wall in there. Burst pipe last year. Terrible leak. The man living there back then..." She stopped herself. "Just keep your radio on at night. Helps with the quiet." Then she smiled too quickly and walked away. That night I kept the lamp on a little longer. I set my phone to play static rain sounds, just for company. The walls seemed thinner than usual. You know that feeling when the air shifts like the building itself is listening? Around midnight, I heard it again. 3 knocks, a pause, one more. This time not from the kitchen wall, from the headboard behind my bed. I sat up. The pattern repeated once. Then silence. I leaned close to the wall and whispered, "If that's the pipes, do it again." For a long moment there was nothing. Then tap, 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 pause, tap. My heart hit my throat. I stumbled out of bed, grabbed my phone, opened the flashlight app. The wall looked the same. Beige paint, one faint crack near the corner. No sign of anything that could move. I pressed my palm flat against the surface. It was warm, warmer than the rest of the room. The next day, I asked the super about the pipes. He looked at me over his coffee, tired in that way maintenance guys always look. "Those walls don't have water lines," he said. 6B shares with 6A and that unit's empty. We haven't rented it since last winter. "Why not?" I asked. He rubbed his jaw. "Somebody complained about sounds." "Weird ones, but we checked it out. Nothing there. Old plaster just carries noise funny. You'll get used to it." I didn't. That evening, I put my ear to the wall again. It was faint, not knocking this time. A hum. Slow, low, almost like breathing through wood. I took a step back, suddenly aware that the light from the window had turned blue with dusk. In that shade, I saw something new. A faint outline along the wall near the floor, almost like a square that had been plastered over. I knelt and ran my finger along it. The edges were soft but definite, 1.5 feet wide, hidden under paint. At the bottom corner, a tiny circle of iron peeked through, an old handle, barely visible. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt too deliberate. The radiator hissed, the ceiling creaked, and then, at exactly 2:14 a.m., it began again. Tap, 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 a pause, tap, right from where that hidden panel sat. I sat up in bed, frozen. The sound came again. Louder. 3 knocks, pause, 1. Then another, closer to the floor, almost against it. I got up, pulled on my robe, and whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. Then, a whisper. Soft, low, impossible to place. Not through the wall, but inside it. It wasn't words. More like someone trying the sound of speech for the first time in years. I ran to the window, opened it, and let the cold rush in. Anything to break that still, heavy air. Outside, the alley was empty, but on the opposite building's window, across from mine, I saw it. 4 small dots drawn in white chalk, like corners of a square. The same shape from the lake house story, the same one the old man drew in Montana. A square meant for something to enter or leave. The whisper stopped. The air in my apartment shifted, like someone stepping back. The wall went still. The next morning, I woke to a note slid under my door. The paper was yellowed, torn from a notebook, written in pencil. It said only one thing. "If it knocks again, don't answer on the 4th. No name, no handwriting I recognized. But in the corner of the page, 4 dots drawn faintly, like the ones on the building across the alley. That night I sat awake watching the clock. At 2:14 I heard it again, tap, 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 pause, and then I held my breath, waiting for the 4th. It never came. Instead, from somewhere inside the wall, a faint voice spoke. One word, not loud, not clear, but enough to freeze the air in my lungs. It said, "Here." By morning, the outline of that hidden panel was gone, freshly painted over. Only the faint scent of plaster dust hung in the air, and one thing carved carefully into the baseboard beneath it. 3 small dots, and one just a little farther away. "Before we start, tell me, are you listening in your room or in your car on a quiet road? If your phone buzzed right now, would you look or let it ring just to see if it stops?" I was 45 the night it began, and I thought I'd finally made peace with being alone. My wife and I had divorced 2 years earlier. The kids were grown, and I'd moved to a small ranch house near the outskirts of Portland, the kind of place where the world feels just far enough away to think clearly. A wide front porch, pine trees out back, neighbors distant but friendly. I liked the quiet. My new life was simple. Early mornings, long work days, slow evenings. By 9 p.m., I was usually in bed reading with the sound of the furnace humming through the vents. That night, a Thursday, I was halfway through a book I barely remember now. What I do remember is the phone. It buzzed once, then stopped. Unknown number. Area code matched my town. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, same number. This time a voicemail. I almost didn't listen. But curiosity always wins at night. The message was 6 seconds long. Just a soft, rhythmic sound. Tap, 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 pause, tap. My first thought. Wrong number, pocket noise. Except there was no background hum, no car, no breathing, no wind. Just the pattern, as if someone had set their phone down and tapped it slowly beside the mic. I deleted the message, shook off the chill, and went back to my book. Then, 2 minutes later, another buzz. Same number, another voicemail. This time 5 seconds, tap, 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 pause, tap. Exactly the same. I turned off the phone, put it face down on the nightstand, and tried to focus on the page. But the air in the room felt wrong, heavier, like the house was listening. Then, from outside, through the half-open bedroom window, I heard it again. Not the phone, the real thing. 3 knocks. A pause. 1. Coming from somewhere near the driveway. I sat up, holding my breath. The night was still, windless. I turned off the lamp and looked outside. My porch light cast a weak cone onto the gravel drive. At the edge of that light, just before the tree line, sat a car. Headlights off, engine quiet. I could just make out the shape of someone sitting in the driver's seat. My phone buzzed again. I didn't touch it. Instead, I watched as the car door opened slowly. A figure stepped out, tall, thin, wearing a hooded jacket. They didn't move toward the house. They just stood beside the car, facing me. Even from that distance, I could tell they were holding a phone to their ear. Mine buzzed again. I felt the vibration through the nightstand. Once, twice. Then it stopped. The figure turned toward the front porch. Took 3 steps, stopped, tap, 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 pause, tap. But there was nothing in their hands. Just the sound carried across the still air, like the knocks were happening inside the sound, not on anything solid. I backed away from the window, trying not to make noise. My heart was a drum in my throat. I thought of calling the police, but what would I say? Someone's knocking on silence? I crept down the hallway toward the front door. The porch light flickered once. When I peeked through the curtain, the driveway was empty. No car, no figure, just fresh tire tracks in the gravel leading toward the road. I checked my phone. 1 new voicemail. I pressed play. It wasn't tapping this time. It was my own voice, whispering. Only 1 word. Here. I threw the phone across the couch. It landed face down, silent. I sat there a long time, staring at it. When I finally picked it up again, the screen showed no new messages. The voicemail was gone. I tried calling my carrier in the morning. They said the last incoming number didn't exist. It wasn't registered to any active line. They suggested maybe it was an app prank or a cloned SIM. But the timestamp matched exactly the moment I'd seen that figure by the car. That weekend, I had the security company come install cameras. The technician walked me through the app, mounted 2 motion sensors, and said, "You'll get used to it pinging sometimes. Bugs, weather, random lights." I nodded, pretending I'd believe him. The first night with the cameras, I left the system on. Around 2:30 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not a call this time. A motion alert. Driveway. Activity detected. I opened the app. The image froze for a moment before loading. There was my driveway, empty. But near the porch steps, a faint shape. Not a person, not exactly. More like a shadow gathered where it shouldn't be. Then, on the footage, the front door moved. Not opened, not rattled. Just flexed slightly inward, as if the air on the other side had pressed against it. Then 3 soft thuds vibrated through the audio. Tap, 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 pause, tap. The camera glitched. When it came back, the door was still. I saved the clip, but when I checked it the next morning, the file was corrupted. Only the timestamp remained. 2:14 a.m. I don't use that phone anymore. I keep it in a drawer, powered off. But sometimes when I walk past it at night, I swear I feel it buzz, faint and rhythmic like it remembers. A few weeks ago, I woke to a new sound. Not the phone, not outside, from beneath the floor. 3 soft knocks. A pause, then one. I whispered, "Here," without meaning to. And somewhere deep below the house, something answered. A single quiet tap. When I checked the security app the next morning, there was one new alert. Not from the cameras, but from the old phone in the drawer. The notification said only, "New voicemail received at 2:14 a.m." and the contact name read, "Home." Before we start, tell me, are you listening with headphones tonight? If so, I want you to notice the space around your room. Every house hums differently when it's late enough. I was 19, and it was supposed to be easy money. Just one night of babysitting for a couple in town. Their home sat at the end of an old cul-de-sac, half hidden by oak trees and the hum of a single flickering streetlight. They said their baby would already be asleep when I arrived. "Just keep an ear out," the mother told me, "and leave the porch light on." She smiled as if that detail mattered more than anything else. They left at 8:30 p.m. The baby monitor hissed softly on the kitchen counter. The air smelled faintly of warm milk and lemon cleaner. I settled on the couch, scrolling through my phone, half watching a movie on low volume. It was one of those still nights where you forget how loud quiet can be. At 9:42, I heard the first sound, a soft tap, coming from somewhere upstairs. I froze, staring at the ceiling. Then it came again. Tap, 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 pause, tap. I laughed under my breath. "Old house," I whispered. Still, I turned off the movie and listened. Nothing else. I told myself it was the pipes or the heater, like my dad used to say, when I was little and scared of the walls. But 5 minutes later, the baby monitor clicked. A small burst of static, followed by silence. Then, a faint sound beneath the hiss. Not crying, not movement, just that same pattern. Tap, 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 pause, tap, coming through the monitor. I turned the volume all the way up. The tapping stopped. For a moment, I thought the connection had died, until a voice, small and breathy, whispered something I couldn't understand. It wasn't the baby. It was lower, slower. A man's voice, like someone trying to speak through glass. I said, "Hello?" My own voice sounded too loud in the kitchen. No answer, just static. I stood, heart thudding, and walked up the stairs. Each step groaned in complaint, as if asking me to stop. The nursery door was cracked open an inch. A thin band of nightlight spilled across the hall. Inside, the baby was asleep, breathing soft, steady. The mobile above the crib turned slowly, though I hadn't seen any air move. I checked the monitor receiver. Its small red light blinked normally. I whispered, "All good," just to fill the air. Then I saw it. On the inside of the window, faint and pale, 4 small dots of chalk, like corners of a square, drawn at child height. I brushed my fingertip over one, powdery, recent. The curtain fluttered slightly, though the window was shut. I backed away, heart pounding, and hurried downstairs. I wanted to call the parents, but didn't want to sound paranoid. I sat by the front window and told myself I'd stay up until they got home. Around 10:30, the motion sensor light on the porch blinked on. I looked out. The porch was empty. Then came 3 knocks at the door. Even, hollow, tap, 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 pause, tap. I froze. There was no car in the driveway. The baby monitor was still hissing quietly on the counter. I whispered, "Who is it?" No answer. Another 3 knocks. Pause. 1. I peeked through the peephole. No one there, just the empty yard and the faint hum of insects. When I turned back, the monitor light flickered red. Movement detected. Upstairs. I ran halfway up the stairs and stopped. The sound was clearer now, footsteps moving softly across the nursery floor. Not heavy, measured, like someone pacing slowly between the crib and the window. I whispered, "Hello?" again, and the footsteps stopped. The silence pressed so hard it hurt my ears. Then, from the baby monitor came a voice. My voice. "Hello?" Followed by 3 slow knocks. Pause. 1. I nearly dropped the monitor. I rushed into the nursery. The air was colder than before, almost damp. The baby still slept, peaceful and unaware. The chalk marks on the window were gone, wiped clean. But on the wall beside the crib, 4 new dots had been drawn, smaller, fresher, and below them a faint, smudged print, not of a hand, but of 4 fingertips pressed together. I stepped back, bumping into the mobile stand. It spun once slowly and stopped with one of the tiny clouds pointing directly at me. And then, a noise from behind the closet door. Soft, patient. Tap, 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 pause. Tap. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to leave the house. But the baby, I couldn't just go. I reached for the closet handle with shaking fingers and pulled. The door creaked open an inch. Inside was darkness, thick and still. I flicked the switch on the wall. Light flooded in. Empty. No coats, no boxes, just bare floorboards. Except near the back corner where the dust was disturbed. 4 faint ovals in a square shape. And something else, carved lightly into the wood. Letters, a single word. Here. I left the closet open, grabbed the baby, and sat in the hallway with my back to the wall until I heard the parents' car pull up. When they came in, I tried to explain, but they just smiled the way tired parents do when someone gets spooked by shadows. The mother went upstairs to check the room. When she came back down, her face looked strange, pale, unreadable. She said quietly, "Did you draw on the window?" I shook my head. She didn't answer. She just turned off the porch light and locked the door twice before saying goodnight. I never babysat for them again. A week later, she texted me out of nowhere. Did the knocking ever stop? I started to reply, but before I could, she sent one more message. We moved. The new place is quieter. Mostly. Last month, I drove past their old house. For a second, I thought I saw a light in the upstairs window. Just a square of pale glow, with 4 small shadows at each corner, like fingertips pressed gently against the glass. Before we start, tell me, who else is awake with you right now? If you're driving, keep your eyes on the road. But tell me, have you ever seen a place open when it shouldn't be? I was 29 when I took the night shift at the diner. Not glamorous, but steady work. And quiet, which I liked. The place sat on an old stretch of Highway 47, the kind of road that seems to run through nowhere and doesn't mind it. The regulars were truckers, delivery drivers, and the occasional lost traveler who'd missed an exit an hour back. We closed at 2, but on bad weather nights, the boss let me keep the sign lit. He said, if someone's driving tired, I'd rather they pull in here than end up in a ditch. It was early December, cold enough that the parking lot sparkled like salt under the lamps. That's the night I learned that not every customer leaves the way they came. Around 1:10 a.m., the diner was empty. No engines on the road, no headlights. I was wiping down the counter when I heard the bell over the door jingle. I looked up. No one there. The door had opened just enough to let a draft roll through, the kind that carries a smell of old rain and cold metal. Then it closed again, slow and quiet, like something unseen had entered carefully, trying not to draw attention. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. Then came the sound, soft and steady, from the floor near the booths. Tap, 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 pause, tap. It wasn't footsteps. It was the sound of something tapping the tile from underneath, like the diner itself had a heartbeat. I crouched, peering under the counter. Nothing but floor tiles, a bit of dust, and one tiny circle of water that hadn't been there before. I wiped it with the rag, cold but not icy. The hum of the neon sign flickered overhead. And I noticed something new. On the inside of the glass, 4 faint dots drawn in condensation, one at each corner of the window. I thought maybe it was from my breath or a customer's hands earlier. But when I wiped the glass clean, they came back, like the mist was reforming itself. Outside, a single headlight beam glowed faintly against the fog. Not 2, just 1. It stayed still for a long minute before sliding away into the mist. At 1:37, the phone behind the counter rang. That alone was odd. The diner phone never rang after midnight. I picked it up. "Highway Diner," I said. Static. Then a slow, deliberate rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap. I hung up. The ringing stopped mid-breath. I looked toward the back hallway that led to the pantry and the restroom. The light there flickered once. Then, from the wall beside it, 3 hollow knocks answered. Tap. 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 Pause. Tap. I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and walked slowly toward the sound. My shoes squeaked on the tile. The smell of grease and coffee grew stronger, comforting in the way routine smells can be. At the end of the hallway, the light flickered again and went out. My beam landed on the pantry door. It was closed, but the bottom corner bulged slightly, like someone was pressing against it from the inside. I whispered, "You can come out," though I didn't know who I meant. The pressure stopped. Then, faintly, from the crack beneath the door, a low breath escaped, like air being shared. I knelt down, heart pounding, and shone the light through the gap. Something reflected back, 4 small white dots, like fingertips catching the beam. I opened the door. The pantry was empty. Just shelves of flour, coffee cans, and a single open jar of sugar, except near the floor, where someone had drawn a square in white dust, 4 dots at the corners. Inside that square sat an old metal spoon, bent, tarnished, the kind of diner silverware that never leaves the building. I didn't touch it. I went back to the counter and sat down, trying to convince myself to laugh it off. Too many ghost stories, I told the empty booths. The clock above the register ticked over to 2 o'clock. Closing time. I flipped the neon sign to off, or tried to. The switch stuck halfway, humming under my thumb. The sign stayed on, casting red letters across the window, and in that glow, for just a second, I saw a reflection that wasn't mine. A figure sitting in the far booth, hands folded neatly, head tilted down, like someone waiting for coffee. But the booth was empty when I turned around. I grabbed my coat and keys, ready to lock up. Then I saw it, a small napkin folded neatly on the counter. I hadn't left it there. On the napkin were faint marks in a circle of water, pressed like fingertips. 3, then 1 apart. The same pattern. Beneath it, someone had written a single word in pen. Here. I left the lights on that night, locked the door twice, sat in my car until dawn. When my boss came in at 7, he found the spoon from the pantry sitting on the counter beside the register. He said, "You left one out." I shook my head. He laughed, a little uneasy. "You'd be surprised what this place keeps for itself," he said. "Back in the 70s, a kid disappeared from here during a snowstorm. They said he was last seen sitting in that back booth. I didn't ask more. I didn't need to. That night, after I quit, I drove past the diner one last time. The neon sign was dark, but the window still glowed faintly from inside. A square of pale light, and in the middle of it, the soft rhythm of someone tapping, slow and patient. Tap, 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 pause. Tap. Before we start, tell me, are you listening in the dark or with the hum of something nearby? Because if you've ever worked a night job alone, you know silence isn't really silent. It just waits. I was 33 when I started doing the graveyard shift at the local AM station, KM 92, out past Redwater Canyon. Just me, an old transmitter building, and the slow crawl of desert wind that makes you feel like you're the only person left awake in the world. The job was simple. Cue the ads, read the weather, keep the signal alive till dawn. Mostly it was hours of talking to nobody and pretending someone was listening. The walls were thin, the lights buzzed, and the coffee machine only worked when it felt like it. The station sat 5 miles from town, surrounded by sand and mesquite. The nearest house was a ranch about 2 miles east, so when something knocked out there, you noticed. That night the air was thick with dust. I was halfway through the midnight playlist when the studio phone blinked. No ring, no caller ID, just the light. We don't get calls. Nobody listens live that late. At least, nobody who can find the number. It's not even listed anymore. I picked it up anyway. KM 92, I said. You're on the air. Static. Then through it, 3 slow knocks. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap. I froze. You don't expect to hear that through a radio line. No background hum, no breathing, just the rhythm. I said, "You've got a bad connection," and hung up. For a while, I convinced myself it was feedback. Maybe interference from a trucker's CB or a signal bounce off the canyon walls. But then, through the glass of the control booth, something caught my eye. The red on-air light flickered, not off, not on, just a slow, pulsing rhythm. Tap, 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 pause. Tap. I stood, leaned toward the studio window, and for the first time in years I realized I could hear my own voice coming back through the monitors, just faintly delayed. Except I hadn't spoken. The microphone was still muted. The voice that came through the speakers was quiet, tired, and familiar. It was me, saying something I hadn't said yet. Can you hear it? The words hung there, soft under the hiss of the transmitter. Then the monitors clicked off by themselves. The silence that followed was so thick, it pressed against my chest. I walked down the narrow hall toward the transmitter room. The hum of machinery felt louder than usual, vibrating through the floorboards, into my shoes, into the air. The metal door stood slightly open. Inside, the red indicator lights blinked in rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap. The cables hanging from the wall swayed, though there was no wind, no movement. And under the central panel, something new. A square outline on the concrete floor. 4 small bolts at each corner, forming a perfect shape. I crouched and brushed the dust aside. The bolts looked recently turned, clean where the wrench had bit. And faintly, in the middle of the square, scratched into the concrete itself. Here. I didn't touch it, but I swear for one moment, the concrete pulsed warm under my hand. Just once, like a living thing taking a shallow breath. Back in the booth, the broadcast lights stayed dark. I checked the main console. Everything normal. Signal output steady. Yet through my headphones, under the static, a low sound started to build. A voice, faint and distant. At first I thought it was another frequency bleeding through, but it grew clearer. A slow whisper. My name. And then, the words, "Don't answer on the 4th." The same warning from that apartment story I'd once read online. I took off the headphones. The whisper stopped immediately. That's when the outer door slammed shut, the one leading to the parking lot. I ran to the glass and saw only dust blowing under the floodlights. No footsteps, no car. Then came 3 knocks. Pause. 1. This time from the metal door behind me, the one leading back into the transmitter room. I called dispatch on the emergency line, thinking maybe the storm was shaking something loose. The call didn't go through. The line was live, but what I heard wasn't the operator. It was the station's own broadcast. My voice, again, on a loop. "You're not supposed to hear this yet." I slammed the receiver down. When I turned, the on-air sign had lit itself again, but this time the words glowed white instead of red. And from inside the booth speakers, faint beneath the static, a child's voice whispered, "He's under." The hum from the floor deepened, a bass note rising through the walls. The bolts in the transmitter room rattled once, sharply, then went still. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the power cut out. Everything went black. The hum stopped. The silence was so pure it roared. When the generator kicked in a minute later, the console lights came back, and every one of the sliders on the mixer had been moved to the same position. 3 up, a gap, then 1. Tap, 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 pause. Tap. The feed returned automatically. Listeners would have just heard static for those 60 seconds. Maybe a pause, maybe a breath. But the log showed something else. A live mic signal during the blackout. Recording length, 1 minute, 14 seconds. Audio content, undetermined human speech. I played it back. At first, just static. Then faintly, the echo of my own voice whispering a single line. "It's awake now." I quit the station the next morning, left the keys on the desk, didn't look back. A month later, I drove by at night. The sign was still lit, though the station had been closed for weeks. No one inside, but as I rolled past, my car radio, which hadn't been tuned to any station, caught a signal for a brief second. A quiet voice said, "You left it on." And beneath that tap, 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 pause, tap. That night, at home, I unplugged every radio I owned. But at 2:14 a.m., the clock on my nightstand flickered once, and the second hand clicked 4 times, 3 together and 1 apart. Before we begin, where are you listening from tonight? If you've ever worked a night job in a place that feels too quiet, you already know. Silence isn't stillness. It's just waiting to be noticed. I was 35 when I took the job at Silver Pines Lodge, a little roadside motel clinging to the side of the Bitterroot Mountains. 12 rooms, 1 neon sign. I worked the overnight desk, midnight to 8. My only duties, answer the phone, log arrivals, and keep the coffee warm for the snowplow drivers who stopped in before dawn. In winter, guests were rare. Most nights, I had the place to myself. The building was older than it looked, converted from a ranger dormitory in the 50s. Room numbers painted crooked, carpets that swallowed sound, the kind of quiet that carries its own heartbeat. The first strange thing came during the storm in January. The snow had been falling since noon, thick enough that the road disappeared. By midnight, the wind had gone still, that eerie pause before a drift starts to shift under its own weight. I just poured another cup of coffee when the phone on the counter blinked. Not rang, blinked. A tiny red light pulsing in a slow rhythm. Tap, 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 pause, tap. I lifted the receiver. No voice, just faint static and a soft hum like air moving through a vent. Then a whisper, low and close. Room 6. The line went dead. We had no guests checked into room 6. In fact, the last person to stay there, a trucker, had left 3 days earlier. I told myself it was a prank. Still, I grabbed the master key and headed down the hall. The carpet muffled every step. The door to room 6 was closed, but the light beneath it flickered faintly, like a TV left on mute. I knocked once. Front desk. No answer. I turned the key. The room was dark. The lamp on the nightstand was unplugged, and yet the TV played on, black and white static. Across the screen, faint horizontal bands moved in a rhythm. 3, pause. 1, tap, 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 pause. Tap. I stepped inside, flicked on the light. The snow outside the window reflected silver against the curtains, making the whole room glow faintly. On the bedspread, something had disturbed the dust, 4 small dots forming a square, as if fingertips had pressed there, waiting. I reached for the TV remote, but before I touched it, the static shifted to a picture. A live feed, grainy and dim. It was the motel's own security camera, but the view wasn't of the hallway or the lobby. It was inside the same room I stood in, facing the bed. And in the corner of the frame behind me, a shadow moved, tall, thin, swaying gently. I turned. Nothing there. The picture blinked back to static. I left the room, shut the door, and locked it from the outside. Back in the lobby, I checked the security monitors. Each small screen flickered through the 12 rooms. Empty beds, silent curtains, except one. Room 6. The screen glowed faintly, showing a figure standing in front of the window, hand raised as if touching the glass. I leaned close. 4 pale prints appeared on the window pane. Then, slowly, the figure lowered its hand and stepped backward, out of frame. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. I replayed the footage again and again. Each time the same thing, 4 fingerprints, a breath of fog, then gone. When I printed the still frame, the image came out blank, all white, but across the top edge of the paper, faintly impressed in the toner, were 4 dots, perfectly square. That was the moment I stopped trying to make sense of it and just started watching. Every night after that, at exactly 2:14, one of the empty rooms would show motion, not always the same one. Sometimes room 3, sometimes 8. Once all of them at once, curtains swaying, doors shifting in their frames as though the building exhaled in rhythm. Tap, 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 pause, tap. A week later, my manager asked why the motion logs were spiking. I told him the sensors were oversensitive from the cold. He shrugged. "These old places breathe funny," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "If you hear knocking from inside the vents, don't answer. They used to say the Rangers kept their radio gear wired through the walls. The signal still hums sometimes." He smiled, but his eyes didn't. That night, the storm returned. Winds moaned down the valley, pressing against the windows hard enough to make them flex. At 2:10, the lobby lights dimmed, then steadied. The monitor for room 9 flashed, motion detected. The feed showed a man standing near the bed, back to the camera, facing the wall. His shape flickered, as though the image couldn't hold him in place. I turned up the volume on the monitor's speaker. Tap, 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 pause, tap. I whispered, "Who are you?" The man turned. No face, just the faint shimmer of light bending where it shouldn't. Then the feed cut to black. When it returned, the room was empty, except for a faint square of frost on the wall where he'd been standing. At dawn, I went to check room 9. The sheets were undisturbed. The air smelled like cold metal. And carved into the headboard, shallow and uneven, one word: "Here." I quit 2 days later. Couldn't sleep. Every night, even at home, I'd wake to that sound, faint, patient. Tap, 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 pause, tap. It seemed to come from my phone, though the screen stayed black. Once I answered, half asleep. A whisper said, "Room 6 is ready." Last week, I drove past the old highway. The lodge was dark, the neon sign shattered. But through the snow, I saw light flickering in one window. Room 6, and on the glass, clear as breath, 4 dots, glowing faintly in the shape of a square. Libraries are built to hold quiet, but after closing, the quiet holds you back. If you have ever stood between tall shelves and listened to the building breathe, you know what pages sound like when they wait. I was 40 when I took the evening shift at the Holloway Public Library. Tuesday through Saturday, noon to close. It felt right. I like people best at a distance, not unkindly, just the way you like a river from the bank. The building was older than our town hall. Stone outside, honeyed wood inside, with brass rails that held the touch of 100 years. 3 floors, a children's room in the rear, a genealogy alcove in the basement, and a clock that never kept quite the right time. We closed at 9. Once the doors latched, the lights fell to a warm half-bright, and the building went thread still, like a quilt laid over a sleeper. That is when I learned our library remembers who lingers. The first odd thing arrived folded inside a returned book. It was a due card from the 70s, cream paper gone to tea color. Someone had written a single word where a name should be. Here. No barcode, no record to match. I set it aside, told myself it was a scrap that fell from an older spine. 2 nights later, I found chalk marks on the carpet of the children's room. 4 pale dots, small as peas, a square near the story rug. I bent to brush them away. They did not smear. They looked placed, deliberate, like the corners of an invisible window. At 8:57, while I turned chairs onto tables, the book drop thudded. That is normal near closing. What was not normal was the rhythm that followed the thud. 3 gentle taps within the chute, a pause, then 1 more. Tap, 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 pause, tap. The sound reached into the room like a finger rested on my sleeve. I lifted the hatch. A single book lay inside, cloth-bound, no dust jacket. No title on the spine, only 4 dots stamped in white where a call label should be. When I opened it, the pages were blank, the paper thick and soft as breath. I brought it to the desk and checked the catalog. No record. I tried the old card drawers out of habit, even though those have sat for show for years. My fingers knew the brass pulls, the soft protest of oak. Where there should have been author cards, an empty divider held the same mark, 4 dots in a square drawn in pencil. I told the building, out loud, that I would shelve the book for the night. Sometimes saying a plan helps the air in the room settle. It settled, a little. By 9:06, the doors were locked. I did a last walkthrough with the lights at half. The stacks breathe when the ventilators cycle down. You learn the hiss and the slow exhale. On the 2nd floor, near 398.2, a book I had straightened earlier lay open on the carpet, face down, spine unbroken. No one had been there since I passed last. I knelt, lifted it, and saw a due card pocket pasted inside the back cover. No stamp, only a date written in pencil. 2:14. No month, no year, just the time. The clock near the stairs read 9:11. The building had a way of rounding the night toward itself. I reshelved the book and told the shelves, softly, that I would not be long. Downstairs, the elevator chimed. We closed that car after hours, but the door slid open a hand's width and the car sighed as if someone had just stepped out. The display blinked twice, then held on B. I chose the stairs. The basement smells like cool paper. 2 bulbs hum above the genealogy tables, and the dark at the edges stays where it belongs. Tonight it leaned in a finger's breadth closer. At the far end, a cabinet stood ajar. The thin metal door tapped the frame once, twice, 3 times, then stopped. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Tap. I lifted the handle and let the door close on its catch. Inside, among microfilm reels, a single manila envelope waited with no label. I opened it over the table. 1 photograph slid out. The lobby, many years ago. Same front desk, a different clock. In the photo, 4 small chalk dots marked the floor where patrons would wait. Someone had written on the back in a hand that pressed through the paper, "Here." The building's power flickered at 9:18. Not out, just a blink that left a soft hush in its wake. My phone lost service for a moment and regained it with a small gasp. I decided to leave the basement for last. In the stairwell, the air cooled. From the first floor came a sound like a book cart, moving very slowly. I know that sound. The wheels carry a light clink that answers the brakes in tile. I reached the landing and saw the cart glide past the corridor's end, no hands on its handle. 4 picture books standing at attention on the top shelf. It rolled to the children's room and stopped as if a foot had pressed the brake. I followed. The lamp over the story rug glowed. On the rug, the 4 picture books lay in a neat square, corners touching corners, leaving a small window of carpet between them. The chalk dots I had seen earlier now rested at each corner of the window. In the center, the blank cloth-bound book waited as if this was the shelf that fit it best. I did not step into the square. I said, "You can have it there for now." The lamp sparked and settled like a nod. At 9:32, the phone on the desk rang once and stopped. Caller ID read simply, "Basement. That line does not connect to any phone." I let the receiver rest. The building prefers patience. Still, a library checks its edges. I returned to the basement, turned on one more bulb, and stood at the end of the genealogy alcove. There is a floor hatch there that no one uses. I have swept around it for months. The brass ring sits flush, paint worn to metal. Tonight, a trace of chalk circled the corners of the hatch, tiny dots that would rub away if you tried. A small breath of air lifted around the ring, not cool, not warm, just present. 3 soft knocks rose through the wood. A pause. 1. I wanted to leave it all closed. I did not. I slid my fingers under the ring and lifted an inch. Paper rustled from below, quiet as a whispered page turn. Then a voice carried up. Not loud, familiar. My voice, a half-second older than the one in my own head. It said, "Do not answer on the 4th." I lowered the hatch. The wood settled on its frame as if relieved. The chalk dust at the corners shimmered once and went still. When I climbed back to the main hall, the front clock marked 9:51. The second hand stuttered, 3 small steps, then a longer one. Tap, 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 pause. Tap. I placed the blank cloth-bound book in the book display by the door, a spot that guests see first thing, and slid a card into its empty pocket so the book would at least look finished. The cardstock felt thicker than ours. I wrote the time we would open, 10 o'clock, and my hand added something without asking my head. 2:14. I set the pen down. I do not write that way. The letters looked right and wrong at once. At 10:02, the lobby lights dimmed to their night setting. The building waited. I stood at the glass, checked that the street was empty, turned the deadbolt, and reached for my coat. The book drop thudded again. I lifted the hatch and peered inside. No books, just a single due card curling at one corner. 4 faint dots in the top margin, a square so small you could cover it with a stamp. On the line for the patron's name, the card said, "Here in a careful hand." On the line for the due date, the card said "Close." The chute clicked in the ducting, quiet and sure, as if something on the other side had stepped away. I could have left. I should have. Instead, I carried the card back to the children's room. The square on the rug still waited, picture books at the corners like quiet posts. The cloth-bound book lay in the center, closed, patient. I slid the due card between its first and second blank pages. The cover lifted a finger's width and settled again. Air moved around my ankles, as if someone had walked by. I heard the faintest tap from the far window, the kind a fingertip makes when it wants to be careful. 3. A breath. 1. The overhead lamp dimmed to a hush. I whispered, "I will leave the door for you." My voice sounded steady. My hands knew the lock. I turned the key in the children's room door and left it unlatched. On my way out, I stopped by the front clock. It read 10:10, then 10:11, then paused with the second hand at the top. The hand ticked 3 small times, then one longer. The face reflected me and the lobby behind, and in that glass, I saw the children's room down the hall, though no angle should have shown it. A square of soft light lay on the story rug. I locked the front doors, set the alarm, and stepped into the night. The streetlights hummed with a thin silver sound. Snow threatened without falling. My breath left small clouds that did not carry far. I looked back through the glass one last time. The blank book sat where I had left it. The due card peeked from its edge like a tongue of paper. In the reflection, the square of light in the children's room brightened, then softened, like a quiet inhale and an even quieter exhale. At 2:14, my phone lit my bedroom in a thin strip. No number, only a calendar alert I did not set. Return here. Below it, a second line appeared and blurred to clarity, as if written from the other side of glass. Please leave the door. Before we begin, what room are you in right now? Is it quiet enough that you can hear the walls? Old houses have a sound to them, the kind that isn't wood or wind. It's remembering. I inherited my grandparents' farmhouse 2 summers ago. It sat just outside Minden, Nebraska. Wheat fields on every side, gravel drive, a single cottonwood that creaked when it wanted company. The house was small but sturdy, white paint blistered, porch swing rusted to stillness. It had been empty for years after my grandmother passed. When I first stepped inside, the air smelled of cedar and thyme. She'd left everything neat, photos in frames, dishes stacked, the radio still on the counter like it might wake up if I turned the dial. I told myself I'd keep it for a while before deciding whether to sell. I lasted 11 nights. The first week was peaceful. Quiet mornings, soft light through old lace curtains, the hush of wind moving over fields. By evening, I'd sit by the window with tea and watch the sun draw long lines across the floor. The kind of silence that used to comfort me. But around the 8th night, the silence began to change. It thickened like air that doesn't want to be shared. And then came the first sound. Tap, 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 pause, tap. From somewhere behind the walls. At first I thought it was a loose shutter. The wind here can sound like a visitor trying to be polite. But the rhythm was steady, almost careful, as though someone waited between knocks for me to listen. The next morning, I checked outside. No branches near the siding. No marks on the paint. Still, that evening, the sound returned. Closer. This time from beneath the floorboards near the old stove. I knelt, pressing my ear to the wood. The knocks came softly, patient. 3. Pause. 1. And beneath them, a faint hum, like someone murmuring under their breath. I found the cellar door hidden under a rug in the hallway. When I opened it, cold air rose like memory. The steps groaned, older than my lifetime. I shone my flashlight down, dirt floor, shelves of canning jars, a single chair. Empty, except for 4 white dots of chalk on the floor, marking a small square. I stayed upstairs that night, every light on. Around 2:14 a.m., the power flickered. The house held its breath. Then I heard a soft voice through the vent beside my bed. Not loud enough to make out words, only tone, calm, rhythmic. And under it, that tapping again, like a heartbeat trying to remember the count. I said aloud, "You can rest now." Sometimes that helps a place settle. The tapping stopped. I let myself believe that was the end of it. But the next morning, every framed photo on the hallway wall had shifted slightly, all tilted inward, their corners pointing toward the center of the wall, toward one small square of plaster that looked smoother than the rest. I pressed it gently. It gave way a fraction. Behind it, hollow space, a small latch, and something like air moving just once, like an inhale that had waited too long. I didn't open it. Instead, I moved a bookshelf over the spot. That night, I slept in the living room. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I woke to the sound of the old radio in the kitchen. Its dial glowed faintly, though it hadn't worked in decades. The speaker hissed, then cleared. A man's voice, gentle, distant. "Is anyone home?" I stood frozen, staring across the dark room. The radio crackled again. "It's been so quiet." Then, 3 slow taps against the counter. Pause. 1. I unplugged it, but the glow stayed a moment longer before fading out. In the morning, I packed my things. I decided to leave that night. Still, I wanted to say goodbye properly, to the house, to what it held of my family. I walked room to room, touching door frames, feeling the small pulse in the air that old homes keep for themselves. When I reached the hallway again, the bookshelf had moved 3 inches from the wall. The plaster square behind it was gone, just a small opening now, the edges soft like worn paper. Inside, the faint smell of cedar and rain, and something else, a whisper. Not quite a voice, but a memory shaped into sound. "You left the light on." I drove to town that night and slept in my truck. When I came back in the morning for the last box, I found the house different. The curtains were open, the front door unlatched, and on the kitchen table, the old radio sat polished clean, humming low. The dial read a station number that didn't exist. I turned the volume knob. A woman's voice spoke softly, like a mother soothing a child. "Close the door, love. The wind's coming in." Then silence. I stepped outside, shut the door, and locked it. As I turned to leave, I heard it one last time, faint through the wood. Tap, 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 pause, tap. That was 6 months ago. I live in an apartment now, miles away. But sometimes, when the refrigerator hums at night, it keeps the same rhythm. And last week, a note appeared taped to my front door, 4 small dots in a square. No words, just that quiet mark. The air around it smelled faintly of cedar. Before we begin, take a breath. Let the air move in and out of the room you're in, because tonight isn't about what's hiding in the dark. It's about what finally lets go. I was the one who found the pattern, not because I was looking for it, but because I collect things that no one else keeps. Old recordings, forgotten broadcasts, tapes from closed stations. My name's Elise. I archive sound. For 12 years, I've worked at a restoration lab in Denver, digitizing audio no one listens to anymore. I catalog hums, static, voices left halfway between sentences. 6 months ago, a box arrived from a decommissioned mountain motel. Inside were 12 reels of tape. No labels, just handwritten numbers and 4 dots stamped in a square. 1 reel for each story you've heard. The technician who shipped them wrote, "All recorded between 2:10 and 2:15 a.m. Do not play them in order." But I did. The first reel hissed with silence so deep I almost missed it. 3 taps, a pause, 1 more. Then the sound of a forest, distant wind, and an old man's breath. A cabin. Snow. A voice whispering, "Here." The second reel carried the faint buzz of a phone line, a doorbell, a man asking for someone who didn't live there. Another whisper. "It's cold." Each tape was its own night, its own house, its own heartbeat. But beneath them all was the same undertone, a steady, patient inhale, as though the air between them was alive. When I mixed them together, something happened. The hums aligned. The spaces between each recording fit perfectly, like rooms connecting through unseen doors. At 2:14 a.m., the layers formed a rhythm I'd heard before. Tap, 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 pause, tap. But this time, something answered. A low tone rising like the first breath before a word. Then, quiet. Not empty quiet. Full quiet. The kind that feels like a pulse under your palm. I turned up the monitors. A woman's voice, steady, near my own, spoke softly through the speakers. We only wanted to be remembered. I froze. The words were clear, threaded through static like silk through fog. Every place that held a breath still wants to exhale. Every voice that whispered here just meant I was. On the screen, the waveform trembled, then leveled. All 12 tapes flattened into one steady line. I thought the file had crashed, but the silence stayed bright, warm, in the way quiet sunlight feels through glass. I whispered, "Are you still there?" And the speakers replied, "Yes, but not like before." That night, I went home. My apartment was dark, my equipment still warm in my bag. At 2:14 a.m., my phone vibrated once. No number. I let it ring. When I listened to the voicemail later, I heard not tapping, not words, just the soft creak of a door opening. Then wind, then peace. The message ended with a long, slow exhale. A week later, I mailed the 12 reels to different archives across the country, each one labeled with a single word: rest. No return address, no reason to play them again. But the night before I sent the last, I dreamt of every place the recordings had come from. The cabin, the diner, the lake house, the motel, the farmhouse, the library. Each stood quiet, windows open. And from inside each one, a single beam of light rose into the dark, meeting in the middle sky like stars that had been waiting for each other to arrive. I woke at 2:14. My apartment was completely still. No knocks, no whispers, just air. I went to the window. Across the city, every building seemed to breathe once. Lights flickering, then resting. Somewhere far off, a door closed gently. And in that moment, I understood. The rhythm was never meant to frighten. It was just the sound of places remembering how to be quiet again. The next morning, I checked the recording logs. All 12 entries had vanished from the database. Only one note remained in their place. It read, 2:14. The house is breathing steady now, and beneath it, drawn in light gray pencil, 4 small dots in a square. I smiled, turned off the lights, and listened. No knocking, no voices. Just the soft sound of air moving through the room. A breath finally let go.